Awesome. All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry, let me just hook up my AirPods so it's easier to hear me. I don't know if you guys can see that. Oh well, we just won't use these today. Great. Okay. So today we're going to do something a little different. I noticed that in our past classes, which is totally fine, we've done great with the passage identification quizzes and everything, and I do think that that's valuable, but as we're moving forward, and as some of you are getting closer and closer to your test date, I do want us to focus a little more on being able to get through like multiple passages. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be focusing on practice test 38. And the goal of today, we're going to do 2 passage identification quizzes. So these are going to be passages 3 and 4. If you're looking for like a bit more focused reading comp, like absolutely do these on your own and you can message me with any questions. But our focus today is really going to be on the first 2 passages from that practice test, primarily because they are 2 cost benefit passages. One is science and one is law. And I do think that that's the hardest category to kind of see. And I do think that it's useful to kind of see 2 iterations of cost benefit. So we're going to do those 2 passages. We're going to start with the science to kind of build upon the skills that we were using last week. And then we're going to try to also get through the legal one fully. So we're going to move pretty quickly through these first 2 identification quizzes. So check out this one, and then I'll give 5 minutes, and then at 11, don't forget to make a wish. We will move forward. So read this, and then I'll put the directions in the chat, but same thing, try to identify what type of passage it is, if it's cost benefit, what is the topic being discussed, if it is informative or persuasive, what is the thesis? And we'll be back at 11:11. All right, everyone. So it's 11:11, and just for the sake of time, I want to push us forward. We had some people coming a little bit later, so I just want to kind of reiterate the plan for the day. We're only going to do two of these, and then we're going to hop into a full passage just because I want us to really continue building. Last week, we fully focused on science passages, so I want us to get through a full science passage today. And then I pulled for us Prep Test 38 has two cost benefit passages as passages 1 and 2. One is legal, one is science. And so we're going to start with the science, and then we're going to at least start the legal. That way we can kind of see, compare and contrast the two and all that. Okay. So looking at this, we've got talking about historical sociology. So the chat was pretty split between whether or not this was cost benefit or whether this was informative. And I mean, I'm going to be honest, like this was tricky in that it really could look like both. If you're going to say it's informative, I would say you would argue Philip Abrams' point. Like Philip Abrams argues that while people are made by society as much as society is made by people, sociologists' approach to the subject is usually to focus on one. So that's the theory. And so, but as we know, like most science or philosophical cost benefits are like introducing an alternative philosopher scientist point of view and then explaining their theory. So this does end up being a cost benefit. This was like a very strange like reading comp passage segment just because there was 3 cost benefit and then the next one's not cost benefit. I'll spoil that. But so it was kind of like a weird thing. But remember, so the difference between when we're looking at informative, persuasive, and cost benefit is one where the author is. So here, the author never specifically attributes or aligns himself with Abrams' view. Like every additional fact he's adding, he's attributing to Abrams. So we know that we're not in persuasive because the author has not taken ownership of any of these facts and has not like said that this is his viewpoint. It would be different if, say, the author had said, however, Abrams correct theory is like we would need some sort of like opinion word that kind of aligns the author with Abrams. We're lacking that, so we know we can't be in persuasive land. So now we're looking at informative or cost benefit. So the big difference between informative and cost benefit is again, like, is the author taking ownership of these facts? For this to be correct, the author could have said, like, what would have made this definitively an informative paragraph is, or an informative passage is, let's say the author had said, method of sociology, like they should have said, the author could have said, the new view is that while people are made by society as much as society is made by people, this view is shown by Philip Abrams. Like we would have needed like one sentence that kind of like isolated the overall theory, but like to the author before aligning it with Abrams. But every single fact we have about this theory is all about Abrams. And so what we get from that is that this passage is going to be exploring like whether or not his theory is correct and debating it with the common sociologist approach. So this was a tricky one, but it was cost benefit. But if you did informative, you're not super far off. And I think like while reading the rest of the passage, you would have gotten there. And like I do challenge you to, if you want some additional reading comp, like do passage 38. This is passage 3. But yeah, that was great, everyone. Okay, so now let's do this one, and then we're gonna hop into our full passage. So same directions as before. Read this one, and we'll be back at 11:20. All right, so it's 11:20. Everyone got this one, which is awesome. So this is very clearly persuasive, and we get this very clear thesis. So again, when we're trying to, when we're thinking about sort of our categories, like the first question you should ask yourself is, where's the author? If you can very clearly see what the arguer is trying to argue, automatically persuasive. And our thesis is for these reasons. So obviously you could try to like fill that in. Aspiring physicians need to develop. Oh my gosh, this is the worst line I've ever drawn in my life. I apologize, everyone. That is not a skill that's tested in law school or on the LSAT. Great. So that's that. A very poorly underlined line. But for these reasons, aspiring physicians need to develop. And so again, like with those skills for that you're learning in Nicole's boot camp, like that word need, must, should, these are all words that kind of indicate like the main point. So again, there's a lot of crossover between persuasive and LR. Like all of the skills that you're doing to find the main point are what you're going to see when you're trying to find your main point when it comes to your thesis statement and persuasive. Awesome. Yeah. Okay, great. So now we're going to do something a little different. So just to kind of reiterate what we should be doing in a full passage, the first thing we should do is identify what type of passage, highlight the thesis, or if it's cost benefit, at least like isolate what topic is being debated. After each paragraph, we're going to do a one-sentence summary of how it achieved the author's goal. So for instance here, if we were working with the passage that we just read, at the end of each paragraph, we would be thinking about this paragraph offered data from or gave us studies that support the idea that physicians need to develop new ways of thinking about interacting with patients. Or this paragraph gave examples of what happens when physicians don't come up with new ways of thinking about it. So we're always bringing it back to that overall like author's goal. And that's why, and that's really the function of these, hold on, I'm gonna get rid of this terrible line that I did. And that's really why we spend so much time on these passage identification quizzes, is because like every single idea and everything you're learning from the additional passages should be supporting that main idea. Phenomenal. Okay, so either start a new Word document or grab a piece of paper. And then we're going to hop into our passages of the day. So if you would rather have it up on your own screen, it's going to be passage 38. And we're going to start with passage 1. Give me one moment to share my screen. I'll try to make it as big as possible. Great. Okay. All right. So how this is going to work, it's going to be similar to most times. So I want you to read the first paragraph. So we already know, because I kind of spoiled it, that we're looking at 2 different cost benefit passages. So I'm going to give 5 minutes, read the first paragraph. And because it's cost benefit, I want you to isolate like what topic is being debated. And then you're going to write that either at the top of your Word document, or you're going to write that at the top of your paper. All right, about 1 more minute. All right, so I don't mean to rush anyone, but I do want to make sure that we're moving forward. So it's cost benefit, and I know like the first reaction should be, oh, Katie told me, so I know. But if not, like what you should have seen to kind of point towards this being cost benefit is that we've already got some debate going on. We've got a myth, we've got scholarship, then we've got one geographer claims could have accounted. So again, the big difference between like informative, persuasive, and cost benefit is the level of ownership the author takes over a viewpoint. So here, there is not one single viewpoint that the author is like, this is the case. It would like this sentence right here, like if we stopped at the sentence here, like we could maybe like I could see an argument saying that the myth persists, but scholarship shows. Like that kind of indicates persuasive. But then we've got this nevertheless, some researchers. So we've still got some debate going on, and the author hasn't picked a side. So that should be your first sign that this is going to be cost benefit. Great. So now what we're looking for here is if it's not cost benefit, if it's not informative and it's not persuasive, and it has to be cost benefit because the author hasn't picked a side, like what is being debated. And so really what we're looking at is, and it kind of like tries to steer you aside because there's some infighting in terms of like what that altering could do. It sort of does a little ping pong effect, is we've got one theory that says the wilderness was untamed before the European settlers harnessed and transformed it. And so, but then they're like, no, that's not true. Scholarship has shown that it has been altered before the Europeans. So scholarship is here. So it's not a debate whether or not like there was completely untamed wilderness, but now we're getting into a debate of was there the deliberate transformation of the wilderness by native populations before the Europeans, or was it just like incidental? So those are the kind of two camps. So if we're boiling it down to one question, the question we're debating is, was there was the wilderness harnessed and transformed prior to, like deliberately prior to Europeans? And so that's really what we're going to be debating here. Great. Okay. So now with that question in mind, read the next paragraph. And then I want you to write a 1-sentence summary of like what this does to this debate. Like, does it start to pick a side? Does it introduce information and then immediately dismiss? Like, is it a raise and dismiss? Like, what happens? So read this and then in 5 minutes, come back and then put a sentence in the chat. It's about like 10 words max that sort of shows what this does to our debate of deliberately altered pre-Europeans or only incidentally altered pre-European. All right. So really great stuff, everyone. So really the purpose of this paragraph was we talk a lot about the huge amount of evidence that supports the benefit of burning and the practice of burning. Um, and then also that the charcoal accumulations, which kind of indicate all of this burning, was greatest where no Native American settlements were greatest. So that's really showing that strengthening the side that natives deliberately harnessed the wilderness pre-European colonialization. Great. So that's really what it is. So this is strengthening that side of the argument. So we don't quite have the author picking a side yet, but the fact that we've got a whole paragraph really like delving into the historical record and like how much evidence they have. Like if we had to guess, he's maybe tipping, but we don't have anything conclusive that says that he's picked a side. Okay. So read this final one and remember, because this is cost benefit, like this is where a thesis is coming from. So I'm really wanting you to look for like, what is the author's final decision? And we'll be back at 11:46. All right, just for the sake of time, I'm actually going to show the first question because it's a main idea question. And I'm going to have that up to kind of like guide, because I know some people are just like fast readers and that's totally fine. So as an option, like feel free to, once you have made your own prediction about what the author has chosen, to kind of look through these, and I'll scroll down in a minute to show the final two since we can't see everything, but try to see like what matches the prediction of what the author has chosen. And then again, we'll be back at 11:46, I believe. Yeah. So remember, because this is cost benefit, like our main idea is going to directly come from the author's final decision regarding the issue. All right, it's 11:46, so we're going to get started and then we'll go through all of these. But first, let's focus on our final paragraph and what the author's chosen. So here we have, again, like adding more evidence to the idea that there was deliberate burning. So in this paragraph, we have the charcoal and how common it is. Here, we're now talking about the diversity of the trees, and how like deliberate burning does account for like maintaining the diversity of the vegetation. And they're talking about when the population was gone, like it went back to like the typical when the settlements were abandoned, the land returned to mixed hardwoods. So again, like we're adding more and more proof and evidence towards the theory that there was deliberate burning and harnessing of the wilderness like prior to the Europeans by the natives. Great. So if we had to choose, we would say the author does believe that there is enough evidence to support the idea that the natives deliberately, oh my gosh, deliberately harness the wilderness. So now that we're looking into our main idea, we know we're looking for something that aligns with that idea. So the common debate was, did the natives deliberately harness, or was it just kind of like incidental? Because remember, we had the sporadic burnings, we had like climate change. So was it that, or was it something deliberate? So that's really what the debate is. So let's look here. Despite extensive evidence that native populations had been burning North and South American forest extensively before 1492, okay, so we did introduce a lot of evidence. This is looking good. Some scholars persist in claiming that such burning was either infrequent or the result of natural causes. I mean, like that's not necessarily wrong because we do have this here. I'm not quite sure that that deliberately comes from our final like paragraph. But again, what we've said about reading comp when we're going through questions is you want to keep an answer until a better answer comes. So this answer like isn't necessarily wrong, but like, is it the main idea? Like, is it the final prediction? No. Great. Okay. In opposition to the widespread belief that in 1492 the Western Hemisphere was uncultivated, scholars unanimously agree that native populations were substantially altering North and South American forests well before the arrival of Europeans. One thing that we definitely know about that carries forward from LR is that we want like reading comp is basically you're looking for weak answer choices because you're looking for things to be provable. Every single answer is provable. And I talked about this before, but again, like when people have issues with reading comp, they usually fall into one of two categories. They're either having trouble like pulling the main point and like understanding what they need to pull and what's relevant from the passage, or they have trouble finding the proof from the passage. So here, the fact that scholars unanimously agree that native populations, that's not true, because if it was true, why would we be even having this debate? So this has to be wrong. Although some scholars minimize the scope and importance of the burning of forests engaged in by native populations of North and South America before 1492, okay, that's not wrong, evidence of the frequency and impact of such burning is quite extensive. Okay. So again, this isn't wrong and this isn't wrong. So now we have to go back and forth and figure out what's a little more honed into what the main idea of the passage is. So A is really saying we have extensive evidence, but some scholars are still persisting. C is saying some scholars minimize the scope, but the evidence is very extensive. And just following like the author's idea, because the author does feel like there is enough evidence, there's a substantial amount of evidence. C is more on brand. A would be that if we ended on a note of like, oh my gosh, we have all this evidence, but some people aren't convinced. Like we just don't end on that note. And so C looks a lot better than A. Where scholars had once believed that North and South American forest remains uncultivated until the arrival, there's no general agreement that native populations, there's not general agreements because we have a whole passage debating whether or not natives were cultivating the forest. So this has to be wrong. E, while scholars have acknowledged that North and South American forests were being burned well before 1492, there is still disagreement over whether such burning was the result of natural or deliberate. Now, this is good, but because this is really like going to the crux of the issue. And if you had like gone into this thinking this was informative, this is probably the answer you would pick because this kind of isolates the problem. However, this is cost benefit. The point of this is not to isolate the problem. The idea is like the main point is coming from what side the author chose. And so E is the problem that C addresses through the final statement. So this is wrong and C is correct because the final, if the author doesn't decide that there's still disagreement, the author decides even though there's disagreement, there's substantial evidence to support this viewpoint. So we have C. Great. So I hope that was a good sort of like reminder of how you go about finding a main point question from a cost benefit. Great. And let's move on to this one. It can be inferred, so on the LSAT, we know that that means concluded, that a forest burned as described in the passage would have been least likely to display. Okay, so this is where we use our roadmap. Like where did, so we have to ask ourselves, like where in the passage did we talk about what happens when a forest is burned and what does that look like? So here, like in our final paragraph, we're talking about the diversity of the trees. And here we're more talking about like the benefits of controlled burning. So if we're asking out, it can be inferred that the forest burned would have least likely to display, like what would a burned forest look like? We're really going to look at this third paragraph. So that's the goal of also making your one sentence summaries. You're making a funnel and giving yourself like a set area to look. So really we know that our proof has to come from this paragraph, and we're really looking at when they talk about a forest, they talk about it up here with the diversity. So go into this, and now that we know where we're looking, try to see if you can find the answer. And then we'll move on in 3 minutes. All right, it's 11:55. I apologize if I'm rushing, but I want to make sure we're getting through this. So from this paragraph, like what we're really getting is that the goal of the fires was to create diversity, their undergrowth, sort of change the forest. So knowing that going into it, it can be inferred that a forest burned as described in the passage would have least likely to displayed numerous types of hardwood trees. Well, we're saying that burning creates diversity. So if we're getting numerous types of one tree, that doesn't sound like diversity. So let's hold off on A. So that looks pretty good. Extensive herbaceous undergrowth. No, because remember, herbaceous undergrowth was one of the one of the perks. Variety of fire tolerant plants. Well, if we're burning and we're getting like if we're burning through the forest, like of course you're going to get like fire tolerant plants that are still there. Various stages of ecological maturity. Yes, because you're burning, you're shaping the forests, all of this, you're contributing to diversity. Grassy openings such as meadows or glades. So this is one that like personally, like I didn't remember. So this is where like our good friend like Control F can really help us. So it's saying that there's 2 matches. So let's look up here. Oh, there we go. Controlled burning creates grassy openings such as meadows and glades. Great. So we know that that's not the answer. So A has to be it. And if we're looking for further proof, like if you still weren't convinced, you could have looked for hardwood. Hardwood. We see it down here. The land returned to mixed hardwood. So once the population died, it came back to mixed hardwoods. We're saying, so this would be the complete inverse of what happens when forests are burned, because this is talking about what happens when forests aren't burned because the native settlements were abandoned. So there's our proof. Great. Okay. Which one of the following is the type of forest identified by the author as a product of controlled burning in recent times? Okay. So really what we're looking for, like when we have something so specific, like we can really look at, for example, this might be a good place to Control F. Like obviously we know that we talk about them. Like here's when we talk about different forests or up here. So you could either like go to this first sentence where we're really talking about forests, or you could literally just Control F it. So here we know what we're getting at is evidence of controlled burning in the tropics before the arrival of the Europeans. So we're looking at the tropics. Oh, I skipped one. Okay. Type of forest identified as a product of controlled burning in recent times. So we're looking for recent. So here, like we have an example of a bunch of forests. So here, what we're looking at, we've got this, and then we're looking for something contemporary. So we've got all of these. So in here, we're talking about examples, and then down we have today the Nicaraguan pines occur where there's been clearing. So now we have like what's happening today in Nicaragua. So let's look around here, extensive pine forest in Guatemala. So we're really like, we know that this is where our answer is going to come from. So we can always like Control F. So if we did scrub, perennials converted mixed homogeneous forest, longleaf / pine, do account for some vegetation. Okay. So we do know that this happens, but we're looking for something in recent times. So let's keep that. / pine. So see, this is a bad sign. When we've got like 2 answers that like it would force us to choose when we don't have enough information. Like this shows that this is probably, these 2 probably can't be the answer, because how would we differentiate between longleaf / pine and scrub oak forests? So that should be a sign for us that we're looking for something a little more honed in and specific. So we're going to knock out both of these. Let's see. So now we're looking at, look at Guatemala. Well, there are extensive pine forests in Guatemala and Mexico. Those primarily grow in cooler, drier elevations. Okay. Regions were such burning influence. So this is just giving an example of like where the burning influenced forest composition. But again, it's not a product of controlled burning in recent times. So this isn't really helping us because they're saying these primarily grow in cooler, drier, elevated regions. Pre-human. Pine forest in Mexico. Again, it's asking us to choose between Guatemala and Mexico. They're in the same sentence. Like this literally can't be the answer. So we better hope that it's Nicaragua, because if not, then we're in trouble. Burning also influenced forest composition in the tropics where natural fires are rare. An example is the pine-dominated forest of Nicaragua. Today, the Nicaraguan pines occur where there has been clearing. Yep, so we have today, so we know that it's in recent times, and that is our answer. So if you have something that's very specific, like you can absolutely Control F it. If not, like a good tip is, you know that we're talking about the different forests here, so you could have read this and knocked things out. And a good clue is that if it's asking you to pick between 2 answers, that we would not be able to choose between due to lack of information, you know that that can't be the answer. Because again, the LSAT is tricky, but it's not unfair. Okay, which one of the following is presented by the author as evidence of controlled burning in the tropics before the arrival of the Europeans? Okay, so really here, we're looking at, we can look for tropics to see where we find that. Great. So here we go. We have tropics. So here's where we're focusing here. So now because of that, we can kind of like center ourselves into these areas. So take a look at that and see what we find. And we'll be back in, let's do 3 minutes. All right, again, I don't mean to rush anyone. So really what we're looking at here is we're looking for proof of that this burning was happening pre-arrival of Europeans. So here we found our tropical to kind of orient ourselves. And so down here we said, such forests were present when Europeans arrived and were found only in areas where native settlements were abandoned. Such forests referring to diverse forests. When these settlements were abandoned, the land returned to mixed hardwoods. Okay, so when the settlements were abandoned, then they went back to being all the same type of trees. This succession is also evident elsewhere in similar low tropical elevations in Caribbean and Mexico. Okay, so this succession is also evident. That's referring to going back to only one type of tree in the forest. So here, we're not talking about high elevation. We deliberately have in the text low elevations. And so now between B and D, we're saying that the fact that there's, before the arrival of the European, the fact that there are now like all the forests are now the same because of the Europeans, that's the proof that they're referring to. And so that becomes our answer. Great. All right. Which one of the following would the author be most likely to agree with? Okay, so first, remember, like, predict what our author said. So our author says that there is substantial evidence to support the idea that there was deliberate burning and altering the landscapes pre-European. So keep that in mind as we're going into this. Also, we want to focus on like, where does the author have this viewpoint? And the author really shows their viewpoint in this like third paragraph and then a little bit in the second. So we know we're kind of focusing ourselves to where the author is revealing their points. So look at this, and then actually we'll just talk through it together because I want to make sure we kind of get through this passage before we run out of time. Okay. The long-term effects of controlled burning could just as easily have been caused by natural fires. And that's wrong, because remember, the author is saying that it was controlled burning, it wasn't natural, because that was the opposing viewpoint. Gone. Herbaceous undergrowth prevents many forests from reaching full maturity. This isn't really something that I remember super well, so we're going to keep it for now, and then unless something blows us out of the water, like we'll go back and double check that. European settlers had little impact on the composition of the ecosystems in North and South America. Well, we know that has to be true because remember we had this whole paragraph about how once the Europeans arrived, and natives were cleared, like the forest went back to being homogenous. So we know like that just completely conflicts with what we read. So that has to be gone. Certain species of plants, okay, I do like how vague this is compared to this one, which says many forests. Certain species of plants may not have been as widespread in North America without controlled burning. Okay, I mean, this has to be it. First off, it's so bland and so basic, like certain species of plants. So at least one species of plant may not even would not, like may not have been as widespread in North America without controlled burning. That's very vague. We have this whole thing talking about how influencing the forest composition and all of that. So that looks really good. Nicaraguan pine forests could have been created either by natural or by controlled burnings. No. Down here, we have a whole thing about how Nicaraguan pine forests at low elevations we're not going to be okay there. Like they would have been fine in the higher elevations, but not the lower. So that can't be it. Okay, so now we're stuck between B and D, but B's looking really nice. Just to make sure that we're correct. Okay. Here's where we talk about undergrowth. When a mature forest land was characterized by open, herbaceous undergrowth, another result of the clearing brought by burning. No, like compared to D, like D is just so vague. We know that has to be it. Great. Okay, 6. As evidence for the routine practice of forest burning by native populations before the arrival of the Europeans, the author cites all of the following except, okay, so we talk about the evidence, second paragraph and third paragraph. So go through these and we'll come back at 12, 11 and ask yourselves like, did I read this? Like, was this something that we read? Because especially in questions like this, the author cites all of the following, like first knock out anything that you know you read. And then when you're stuck to the final, that's when you can kind of do your control F and double check. All right. So let's look at this. The author cites all the following except similar characteristics of fires in different regions. That doesn't sound familiar, so we'll hold that for now. Like we really talk about the forests, but I don't think they ever like compare fire. They were never like, oh, this fire looks like this fire. So that seems a little out there, but let's look at everything else. The simultaneous presence of forests at varying stages of maturity. Yes, because we'd have down here mosaic quality, different stages of ecological development. So that one's out. Existence of herbaceous undergrowth. We've talked about herbaceous undergrowth in every single answer choice. Gone. Heavy accumulation of charcoal near populous settlements. So charcoal is ringing a bell to me. Oh, yep. One group of researchers found the sedimentary charcoal accumulations greatest where no Native American settlements were greatest. Great. This is in. Presence of meadows and glades. We got that in the last question. We know that it's here. Because we have like meadows and glades up here. This one's out, so it has to be A. So that's an example, like with these are your like easy money questions where it's very easy to find the proof for it. So really like trust yourself in terms of did I read it? When you don't know, like control F it and move on. But like these are your like nice money questions. Okay. The succession mentioned in the last sentence of the passage. Here we go. So for this one, this will be our last. Actually, we'll go a little over so we can get this last question in. So we want to read the context in which it's coming from. So this succession is also evident elsewhere in similar low tropical elevations in Caribbean and Mexico. Okay, so we're looking to define what this succession means. Our first instinct should be to read the sentence before. Today, the Nicaraguans' pines occur where there have been clearing, followed by regular burning, and the same is likely to have occurred in the past. Such forests were present when Europeans arrived and were found only in areas where native settlements were substantial. When these settlements were abandoned, the land referred to mixed hardwoods. Okay. So really what we're looking here is this succession. So this same trend. And the trend we're talking about is when the natives departed and when it's only the Europeans, like it goes back to being a homogeneous forest. So let's look at these answers and try to see which one best translates. Forest clearing followed by controlled burning, nope. Tropical rainforest followed by pine forest, no. European settlement followed by abandonment of land, no. We're looking for something about like all the same trees are back. Homogeneous pine, well, there we go. Bada bing, bada boom. Pine forest followed by established settlements. If we're trying to tell, okay, so they're both talking about pine forests, but really what we're focusing on here is that it's all the same type of trees. And so this succession of getting all the same types of trees is what happens from the settlements being cleared. Not pine forest, then established settlements. Great. Okay, last question. Primary purpose of the passage. Okay, so we're trying to figure out like what is happening. So it's a debate between two different like schools of thought, and the author is choosing a side. So now that we have this, like let's kind of go through. Refute certain researchers' views. Yeah, I mean the author picks a side, so we can keep that for now. Support a common belief. No, because the common belief was this myth up here. Gone. Counter certain evidence. So this one does look really good. So let's think about this. Refute certain researchers' views. So this is saying that we're straight up saying like this is not the case because of this. Counter certain evidence. Okay, so now we have to ask ourselves, like, what evidence are we countering? So if the author is choosing to say that prior burning by natives was the case, then what is the counter evidence that they have to talk about? And what we find, and even when we look through our roadmap, is that we introduce the problem, the author gave proof for this theory, then the author gave more proof for the theory. Like we don't really have evidence that we're countering. It's more exploring this theory and then continuing to find research and evidence. So A to C, like A is more in line. Synthesize two viewpoints. No, the author picks a side. This isn't the case. Correct the geographical record. No, like the geographical record is really this. So if anything, like this viewpoint is supported by the geographical record. So that's where we get A. Okay, so for next week, I will say if you would like, and I'll start, I think next week what I'll do is I'll stick around for an additional, I'll come early. So I'll start class at 10:50 next week, and I'll join and I'll invite anyone in who wants to do the second passage from 38. It's another cost benefit, but it's legal. And so if you're still struggling with cost benefit, like I think this is a good one because honestly, most cost benefit end up being legal passages. So 38, passage 2, if you want to do that on your own and then join me at 10:50 next week, we can absolutely go over this. If not, that's the end of class. Next week, we're going to do a similar structure where we're only going to do 2, and then we're going to hop into a passage, and I'm going to go a lot brisker next time. Like I'm only going to give 3 minutes for everything instead of 5, but I was trying to get us into the swing of things. So if anyone has any questions, I'll stick around for another couple of minutes to like 12:20. But if not, thank you everyone for joining me. I hope this was helpful. I'll put my email in the chat as well as my number. Yeah, so if you have a question, feel free to just call it out. I see someone raise their hand.
Yeah, not to ask a dumb question, but what does it mean to be like because yesterday I was working on a reading comp, and then I'm having trouble with these questions. It can most reasonably be inferred from the passage. Like what does exactly, like what is concluded? What is I'm having trouble with those question types.
Okay, so here I'll pull up. Let's look at this passage to kind of like see the difference. So there's questions that are like explicitly coming from the text. So for instance, this one, as evidence for routine practice, the author cites all of the following except. If you have anything that says in the text or the author cites, that means that this answer is explicitly in the text. Like it is going to be written. You are like word by word finding this answer. Like you don't have to think about it. Like it's more of like a little scavenger hunt. Like you know that all of this answer is in here. Now, when we're looking at, I'm trying to find what was our, yeah, so example, which of the following is presented by the author's evidence explicit? Like it's explicitly in the passage, so you're looking for like direct proof. Now, if we have, yeah, type of forest identified. So these are kind of those keywords that are showing that we're going to find it deliberately. Now here's our inferred question. It can be inferred, so it can be concluded. So basically that just means like from reading the passage, what do you have enough evidence to, even though it's not explicitly stated, like what do you have enough evidence to support? So you're in Nicole's bootcamp, right? Yeah, so when you guys are doing like most strongly supported, this is what, it's the same idea.
Okay.
So it's not that it's deliberately in the passage, but you have enough evidence to get you here.
Okay.
And so for these, would be least likely to display, like you're looking for something close, you're looking for something in the same family. So that's where it's really important to like with our roadmap, and then additionally like with like once you kind of have where the information should be, like treat it like your funnel. So forest burned, least likely to display, where do we talk about the forest and what it would look like? We talk about what the forest would look like in this final paragraph. So then from here, like we know that a lot of like diversity is a big thing we get. We have evidence of the undergrowth, variety of fire tolerant plants. Well, if you're burning the forest, it's like clearly like fire tolerant plants, like they're going to be the only things that are still here. Grassy openings, we do have support for that. So it's not as though you're taking a complete guess, but it's again like a most strongly supported. Like what do you have enough evidence to say. And so that's why your instinct when you were like, it doesn't talk about numerous types of hardwood trees, like you recognized everything else. Like you're really more following your instinct on this than you are with
Okay.
the explicit. Like with the explicit, like if you don't find in the passage, that can't be the answer. Cause like the author can't cite something. The answer can't be for the author says here if the author never said it. Whereas this one, like you're not like explicitly finding the answer in the text, but you just have enough evidence to support the answer you're choosing. So it's just a different level of support.
Okay. The last question I have,
Yeah.
yeah, well, hopefully I'm not keeping you of your time, but like,
No, you're good. Oh, hold on. Let me stop recording.
oh,
Okay.